This is Independence Square in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. Has free market capitalism failed the former Soviet states? That's the motion in our Intelligence Square debate, brought to you in association with the Foundation for Effective Governance. With me, Zainab Badawi, here on BBC World News.
The Intelligence Square debate is back this week in Kiev in Ukraine. A top panel and audience raring to go. As usual, our host, the urbane Zainab Badawi.
This is Independence Square in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, which became independent nearly 20 years ago. I'm Zainab Badawi, your chair for an important debate on whether free market capitalism has failed the former Soviet states. After the Soviet Union collapsed nearly 2 decades ago, the newly independent states rushed to embrace capitalism. They were told by the West that it would improve economic growth and lift living standards for everybody. The reality, however, has turned out to be far more complex. Welcome to the Ivan Franko National Theatre in Kiev for this Intelligence Square debate brought to you in association with the Foundation for Effective Governance, which is a non-political organisation set up to improve public policy here in Ukraine. We're debating whether free market capitalism has failed the former Soviet states. Arguing for the motion, David Aronovich, British broadcaster and journalist, Irina Hakhamada, Russian economist, and arguing against the motion, Andrei Shevchenko, a member of the Ukrainian parliament, and the former First Lady of Ukraine, Katerina Yushchenko. That's our panel. Welcome to you all. All right, well, without further ado, let's hear our panellists make their opening arguments. And first of all, David Aronovich, the award-winning, often controversial broadcaster and columnist for the Times of London, and a former communist-leaning leader of the National Students' Union in Britain. David Aronovich, your time starts now.
Thank you. Good evening. The motion is that free market capitalism has failed the former Soviet states, of which Ukraine is obviously one. The point about capitalism is that it is what we might describe as protean. It has many, many different forms. There isn't only one kind of capitalism, there are dozens of forms of capitalism. And our argument on this side of the motion is that the particular forms of capitalism that were adopted by the former Soviet states were wrong for you and have turned out badly, worse than they could have been had more care been taken and better judgments made. The form of capitalism that you adopted bore many more relations, let's say, to the capitalism of the United States in the 1880s, when there were incredible monopolies, where there was an effective rule and an interlacing between politics and hugely rich and powerful men, almost always men, who not only ran the economy, but therefore ran democratic politics. It was only because of a massive effort at the end of the 19th century by democratic forces and by people who sought a new and renewed form of capitalism that it was changed. So how do we find ourselves here? And let me just give you the perspective of a Londoner. Do you know who bought the world's most expensive home in London? It was a Ukrainian. The world's most expensive home cost £80 million sterling. This is an odd situation, is it not, ladies and gentlemen, whereby you have people in this country who are so wealthy that they buy the most expensive houses in London. Not the most expensive houses in Kiev, maybe they already have that, but in London. And that the next-door neighbour who gets upset about it is the mayor of Moscow. Was this money amassed at the expense largely of the Ukrainian people by somebody who was an Einstein? In other words, who had the business genius that Einstein had for science, or that Shakespeare had for literature, or that Andrei Shevchenko, the other one, had for football. Or was there some other process at work that created these immensely wealthy, and not just wealthy, but incredibly powerful families? No, as I understand it, Mr. Pinchuk got a lot of his money because he was the beneficiary of state sales of assets when Leonid Kuchma was president. And there is something remarkable. There is something to me utterly remarkable about his wife describing herself as a philanthropist because she gives some money to AIDS when so much money has been got by that family from the Ukraine. It is a little bit like somebody stealing your wallet and everything in it and then giving you $10 back and saying, I'm a philanthropist. But the problem is not individuals. It is also its influence upon the political system. The New York Times, 2006, outside the Ukrainian parliament, when in session, it says, the area resembles an open-air luxury car exhibition. This New York Times reporter, who had been here for some time, said they have used parliament as a forum to protect their interests. These include campaigning for tax breaks, retaining customs fees to protect their companies against imports, and ensuring a weak, poorly paid judiciary that has allowed sales of state-owned enterprises at well below market prices. In other words, you as citizens got nothing like the rate that you should have done from the sale of these state assets. But why? Why did this happen? First was a desire to move the privatisation with incredible speed, reckless speed, speed beyond anything that was actually required. The second was a belief somehow or other that if you were rich, that was a virtue in itself. Capitalism itself is neither pro nor anti the public interest. It does what it does unless it is regulated by a state and by citizens to act in their benefit. A capitalist does not act on the public benefit merely out of charity, but usually because the system is constructed so that that happens. And there has to be the clearest separation between private capital on the one hand and the public interest and the state on the other. The clearest separation. My last point is this. Of all the words that were important during the beginning of the end of the old Soviet Union, the word that seemed to mean least to people was the word that was most important. Glasnost was the most important word. It was the word that was forgotten. You swapped unaccountable state power for unaccountable market power and for oligarch power. But the key word was glasnost. You know what they're doing and you demand the right to know. You say what they should do and you have the right to demand a say and to be built in the system. Knowledge should be with the people, and when knowledge is with the people and they have the capacity to run it, you will begin to formulate a capitalist system that is not the so-called free market capitalist system with which you have been saddled. I ask you to vote for this motion.
David Aronovich, thank you very much indeed for your arguments. Our next speaker is Katerina Yushchenko, former First Lady of Ukraine. She's an American-trained economist and chairman of Ukraine 3000, which promotes citizen involvement here in Ukraine. Katerina Yushchenko, your time starts now.
Thank you. Today, I will argue against the proposition that free markets and capitalism failed the former Soviet Union. First, let's define what is a free market. It's private property protected by rule of law. It's private production based on a profit incentive and free competition. It's free market pricing mechanisms where prices are determined by supply and demand, that is, by the consumer and the producer, and not the state. Those countries which quickly and comprehensively moved toward these goals, the Baltic countries, Poland, the Czech Republic, were most successful and now are democracies with efficient market economies, private ownership, relatively high growth, high standards of living, and minimal corruption. Those countries that took a gradualist approach ended up with higher rates of inflation, greater and longer decline in output, more income disparity, more corruption, and less democracy. Ukraine, unfortunately, was one of the last to adopt serious market reform. Those reforms that Ukraine did adopt, however, yielded quite impressive results. But, and this is my second argument, communists, old enterprise managers, bureaucrats, and the newly rich banded together and fought free market and democratic reform. They assured the population that they did not need capitalism, that Ukraine needed its own so-called third way, a state-regulated transition to a social market economy. And they created market distortions. They created subsidized credits, trade quotas, licenses, price controls, etc. And they put in laws to entrench themselves. And they established huge and populist social programs where the benefits go mostly to the wealthy and the privileged. And a large bureaucracy, miring the economy in red tape and corruption. The problem was not free markets and capitalism, but the post-Soviet politicians and the distortions, uncertainties, and populism that they created. There was and there is no alternative to adopting free markets, which have been proven worldwide to provide the greatest economic growth and highest standards of living. Authoritarianism breeds corruption, and corruption breeds authoritarianism. Economic freedom is a prerequisite of political freedom. Finally, it is incorrect to lump the entire former Soviet empire into a single category. The Soviet bloc was made up of many different nations with various mentalities, cultures, and histories. They made very different economic and political decisions, and thus had very different results. Thus, you have high-income, liberal Estonia with very little corruption, and you have Central Asian states that are harsh dictatorships with no market economy and practically no economic growth. Thank you.
Katerina Yushchenko, thank you very much indeed. So, now arguing for the motion that free market capitalism has failed the former Soviet states, we have Irina Hakhamada, and she is a trained economist who ran in the Russian presidential election, twice been elected to the Russian parliament, and
Thank you very much.
a leading critic of the Russian Prime Minister Vladimir Putin. So, Irina Hakhamada, please, your time starts now.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Zainab. It is a great honor to have some words here and discussing this problem with a very great audience. I have been in high politics for many years and have been trying to build liberal society in Russia for 13 years, and now decided to quit it. That's why now I'm trying to be absolutely objective. That's why I want to make some points about this topic. There are two very popular points in Russia in public opinion. The first one, people are not ready to democracy and to build real free market capitalism. The opinion number two, capitalism is not fair society, is not fair system. That's why we have to build something absolutely progressive, very fair, something absolutely new. I guess that the main reason why capitalism has failed neither elites nor people's expectation in former Soviet states is that the expectations were overrated. Post-Soviet elite irresponsibly built bureaucratic capitalism with enormous corruption level. As a result of that, people start associating capitalism with negative notion. So what is the reason why elites were found so irresponsible? The reason is that the poor came to power. They don't care about political culture and state's interests. For them, power means money first of all. A change of generations in authority and elite is necessary. Satisfied children and grandchildren of rich should replace the nouveau riche. But for now, we should keep the balance somehow and implement the elements of responsibility and political elite step by step. Also, we should keep fundamental values of free market capitalism and democracy. That is a question of our responsibility. Maybe it doesn't sound so great. Maybe it doesn't sound so tough or charismatic, because in this case we need a very big passion. But in our history, we had so many dreams and so many attempts to build the Sun City. And this idea finished by the road to the hell. Thank you very much.
Irina Hakamauda, thank you very much indeed. And our final speaker on the panel is Andrei Shevchenko, the former journalist and broadcaster, now a member of the Ukrainian parliament, and he is a supporter of the bloc of the former Prime Minister here, Yulia Tymoshenko. Andrei Shevchenko, your time starts now.
Well, my fellow panelists almost convinced me that we shouldn't have started reforms 20 years ago. We are talking about the 15 post-Soviet nations which have been going through a major transition from the planned economy to a free market economy. And I would like to talk about yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Let's start with the past. In 1990, I was 14 years old, and I was a schoolboy in the school 1 block away from this wonderful theater. And I remember the life at that time quite well. If we went to a grocery, we would probably see empty shelves and long lines in order to get literally everything. Food, drinks, soap, shampoo, toothpaste. All of that was hard to get. And even if you had money, sometimes it would not solve the problem. Let's keep the conversation about this ill Soviet planned economy which overexploited the natural resources. I'm just stating that that system was morally wrong, it was ill, and I'm quite sure it was very alien to the very human nature. There was no choice for that system but to change. Moreover, in every field where the state took its hands away, we saw major progress. More jobs, more money. Retail, tourism, housing, construction, you name it. Now, speaking of today, I would like to talk about the people. And I would like to say that at this moment we can see the people with a quite different mindset compared to the people that we used to see 20 years ago. Free competition, the spirit of entrepreneurship, individual rights and freedoms. Those are the core values of the people in the audience, of the people who are walking down the streets of Kiev and also of Baku, and I would say of Moscow too. It's a very different nation which has gone through a major transformation. I have the recent polling data from the Razumkov Center of Ukraine. The people had a chance to choose one of the two statements. Statement number 1. There should be no rich and poor. People should be equal in terms of their prosperity. 26% of support. Statement number 2. People should be equal in terms of rights, but their prosperity should depend on what skills they have and how hard they work. 71% of support. Do you remember what socialism was about? There should be no rich, no poor, and the state will take care of that. So these people think differently now. And if you think of the way they make decisions, you would see the people who rely on themselves, who demand much more from the state, from the government, who are capable of standing for their rights and for their freedoms, exactly like we saw in the year of 2004 during the Orange Revolution, which at that time took place just a couple of blocks away from this wonderful hall. That is probably the best, the most wonderful result of this dramatic transformation that this nation has been coming through. And now finally, speaking about the future, let's think which way we are going. I'm quite sure that in the years to come, we'll see more privatization in this country. I hope we'll see a much better environment for business, for individual initiative, and I hope we'll see more good results to come, just like we have already seen in many post-Soviet countries. Let's think about the Baltic states, who now have a chance to enjoy all the benefits of the EU membership. Or let's think about the Georgians, who for many years had no light, had no heat, had no natural gas, and now most of them have it. And it happened in just a couple of years for one simple reason, because there was a government which was really committed to major liberal free market reforms in their country. I have been thinking about Ernesto Che Guevara. In our debate, he would probably be sitting on your side, David and Irina. Once he said, if I lose, it will not mean that the revolution was wrong. So I would say the following. Of course, in many countries of our region, the free market economy or capitalism has not brought all the good things we have expected of that. But we know that free market economy and capitalism inspired our nations throughout the region. We know that it has brought many wonderful benefits to the people, and those things were unthinkable during the Soviet times under the Soviet socialist planned economy. And I'm quite sure, I absolutely believe, that more good things and more good benefits are to come. Thank you.
Andrei Shevchenko, thank you very much. Well, there you have it, the opening arguments from our four panel members, and they've all put their arguments very enthusiastically and strenuously. Now, what I should say is that as our audience were coming in today, before the debate, they were actually asked to vote on where they stand on the motion free market capitalism has failed the former Soviet states. And I am going to tell you now how our audience here in Kiev have voted. So, for the motion, 40% were for the motion, 42% against the motion, and the undecided, the don't knows, were 18%. So, panel, there's all to play for on this. This is a very, very close match here. So you're going to have to get your thinking caps on, and I'm going to ask the audience here to test your arguments to see if you can convince them either way. All right? Okay, so let's see what our audience have made so far of our debate. Can I start with this lady here?
My question is for the against section of the panelists. On the one hand, the Ukraine has one of the lowest GDPs per capita in the world. On the other hand, by various public sources, we understand that there are more than 10 multi-billionaires in Ukraine in euro. Is it true that Ukraine has become a classical oligarchy? And if that is so, how does it serve the interests of the people? Thank you very much.
No, I'm not going to answer yet. We'll take a couple of questions. Can I have some more questions, please, sir?
I think that both sides are right in some ways. Yet my question is, do you not think that if it was, let's say, the Swedish version of capitalism that would have been introduced, there would not have been as much disappointment and possibly but more success? And by that I mean, even during the 40 years in government by socialists, they accepted capitalism in this form.
Next question, and I'll come to you, panel, in a moment. Yeah. Okay, you.
I'm advisor to the Minister of Economy of Ukraine. And my question is, do you think that the system of state capitalism, when the government officially support and promote the interest of national corporations or even own them using nationalization, could be applied for post-Soviet countries in order to economic increase?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I mean, the last two questions were in a way linked. It's not just capitalism. I'll go to this side first. It's not just capitalism, it's the model of capitalism. And one question there, that the Swedish model might have been better than that rampant, extreme form adopted in the former Soviet Union.
First of all, on the first question, where the lady said that Ukraine is one of the poorest countries, in fact, Ukraine is a middle-income country. too often we compare ourselves to a high-income country. So I think that we should understand that it takes time, where it took the United States 100 years, for example, and it may have taken Poland 10 years, and it took Hungary 10 months, and it took Czechoslovakia 24 days.
But her question was, is Ukraine close to becoming an oligarchy?
If it does not put in a rule of law system that allows people to take part, to use their capital, then it will become one, it will stay one. But we need to bring in free market reforms. Regarding
so it
the
could
Swedish,
be one. It could be one.
If the people themselves do not change the system. Just very quickly on Sweden, you know, it's easier to distribute wealth when you've already generated it. I want to say that unless we have a free market system that generates wealth, we will not have any wealth to distribute, such as the Scandinavian countries have.
Okay, I'll just ask you then, Andrei Shevchenko, I want to ask you, Andrei Shevchenko. On this first question that we had, is Ukraine close to becoming an oligarchy? We all know about the Russian oligarchs and all their activities and the pursuit of luxury abroad and so on that David Aronovich talked about. Is Ukraine the same?
I hope we are not. And I think free market, the way we want it to be, is the best cure against that. And speaking of these different models of capitalism, to the benefit of our debate, let's clarify this choice. We're choosing between the planned economy and free market economy. And I would like to play old style in that sense. There is a very clear distinction between the two things. When you're talking about planned economy, it means state ownership, and it means the state is deciding who is benefiting out of that. And if we're talking about free market economy, it means private ownership, it also means private entrepreneurship. And of course, in every capitalist country, there is no 100% pure capitalist country in the world. In all of those countries, the state imposes some regulations and some limits on those or other fields of the economy. But that distinction is very clear. Planned economy with state ownership, and private and free market economy, capitalism with private ownership, and so on.
David Aronovich, Andrei Shevchenko has made it quite clear. I mean, are you arguing for a return to the good old days of how things were done in the Soviet Union?
I must admit, when I was listening to Andrei Shevchenko's absolutely excellent address, I thought I was listening to a future Prime Minister of Ukraine.
Oh, there you are. You're supposed to be on the other side, David Aronovich, not on his side.
I am on the other side because I thought his position was presentationally brilliant, but I also thought it was brilliant for another reason, which is his argument took absolutely no account of our argument. It was hermetically sealed. He seemed to argue as if we thought Cuba was the kind of model Ukraine should follow. We don't. And as for Che Guevara sitting on this side, Che Guevara must have been hoping for exactly the implosion of capitalism, that the oligarchy that you are so quiet about, Andrei, you are very quiet about.
They've just admitted, though, to be fair to them, that they're on the verge of that.
I think one side of the panel does. If you notice a distinction.
There are not many things to add about the oligarchs after what you said about it.
Well, no, but let's notice the distinction. The distinction between the opposition side is between one that says, yes, the current system has failed Ukraine, but it's not market capitalism, and the other side of that argument that seems to be saying, whatever you call it, the market capitalism, Ukraine has not failed. This is your position. So you actually have very, very different views between you, and you can decide to support, I think, one half of that view by voting for the motion. I think it would help you to do it. But we are not arguing for state socialism. What we are arguing for is the fact that actually, let's put it this way, glasnost and the attitudes towards glasnost and democracy and absolute accountability and transparency have to come first. It's not the other way round. It is not change the economy first. Then
you made that point. But David and Irina, the questions from the floor were quite specifically, you rubbished all of capitalism, and what they're saying is there are some models of capitalism, call it state capitalism, call it the Swedish model, that actually have some merit, and you seem to be lumping them all in the same dustbin.
Swedish capitalism is a very good thing and very great dream. Yes.
For who? They've got it.
For all post-Soviet countries, because it's so good to combine socialism and capitalism. But I think no chance in the future and now, because under Mr. Putin presidency and Mr. Medvedev, we have the same game. Big corruption and big enterprises. SME state, SME private.
Okay.
Sometimes they want to give it, sometimes they want to take it, but the result is the same.
Okay, so they don't have state capitalism.
Nothing about small and medium business, and nothing about free market and real competition.
Okay. Has that answered your questions? Yeah, okay, let's take some more questions from the floor.
Thank you.
Stand, please.
I traveled a lot of business on former USSR countries and see life level and life level in different countries. So why in former USSR the most successful countries with high life level are non-democratic or capitalistic countries as Belarus or Kazakhstan? And democratic and capitalistic Georgia, with very progressive president and government, lives very poor. I see it on my eyes.
Okay, let's just take one more. Yes, the young lady there, if you stand.
My name is Olga Zhkoska, and two of my questions are mainly to Mrs. Yushchenko and to Andrei Shevchenko. Starting with Andrei.
Sure.
You were saying that you are so hilariously happy about people answering that they believe that there not be everyone equal, but for skills and talents, you should get equal remuneration. Do you really believe that in our country currently the system, economic and political system, gives equal opportunities as a component of free market? And another thing, one of the speakers, seems to me it was Katerina Yushchenko, mentioned that one of the components of capitalism is the rule of law. As a lawyer, I'm asking you, do you believe that there is a rule of law in this country? Do you believe in equal opportunities in defining property interests in courts? Don't you know about the vicious circle of corruption starting from school and then up to very top politicians? I don't agree that this is right, that poor took power and that's why it failed. It's because it was stolen party money which formed the basic initial capital. And the mentality didn't change since then, and the same people are running the show. And that's one of the core reasons why it failed.
Since they were addressed to you, Katerina Yushchenko, please address those points.
When we talked about the rule of law, if you listen to me carefully, I said we absolutely do not yet have a rule of law. And the reason is because we did not adopt those measures very quickly. By adopting a gradual form of capitalism, we let people, what is called in economics rent seekers, people who are trying to take advantage of the system, trying to use money transfers to take the system. But it's not because capitalism is wrong. It is because we did not adopt those reforms. We adopted something much different.
So you have inadequate systems for regulation and so on.
Let's talk about the whole region. And I have the data from the Doing Business Index by the World Bank. And it says Estonia, a post-Soviet country of Estonia, for many years has been staying in the top 20 around the world. It's Doing Business Index. Unbelievably, but Georgia rocketed from number 112 in 2006 up to number 18 in 2008. Azerbaijan, 97 in 2008 and 38 in 2009. That shows that it works when the government stays committed to reforms. It's something that this country has not seen yet, but I'm quite sure it's going to see sooner or later.
You didn't give the figure for Ukraine, 142 out of 183 in that World Bank study about countries to do business. So Ukraine does pretty badly.
Well, in some positions, but we can also talk about some other positions.
All right. Come back to you, David Aronovich. The point that Katerina Yushchenko made, which is, yes, you didn't have adequate systems for regulation to ensure that free market capitalism, when it was brought in, was going to be robust. You didn't have the systems of checks, balances, collecting taxes, that kind of thing.
I, like a lot of the audience, I was immensely impressed by what the lady down here said and the clarity with which she said it. And I thought, and incidentally as a backdrop to the fact that we're having this debate at all, I thought it was immensely encouraging that she said it and that you applauded to it and even those of you maybe who disagree with it took it on board, because this is actually where we have to go with this. I was listening when the gentleman at the back was talking about Belarus and Georgia. Without knowing the figures, I thought to myself a very simple thing. Where would I rather live, Belarus or Georgia? Give me Georgia any day. Give me Georgia. Give me Georgia because journalists can work freely in Georgia, and ultimately and eventually my belief is that as a result of that, partly as a result of it, things will turn out better for the Georgians than they will for people in Belarus.
I always found it very strange that the person would talk about Kazakhstan and Belarus, because in fact those two countries are among the slowest growing and among the less politically free. And I think if you have to compare us to someone, it would be better to compare us to the Baltic countries.
All right. Quick point for you, Irina, and then I'll come back to the audience.
I think it is very important to start to build your free market capitalism without oligarchy capital. That is main point. If you can to do it absolutely independently, maybe based on the small and medium business, you will have a very short road to the real national model of capitalism. If you just in the startup involve big capitals unified with political power, the road will be very long with so many difficulties.
Okay, let's go to the audience. What's your question?
My question to Andrew and to David. Yes, I'm talking about flexibility. That flexible system, it's a successive system. When we're talking about Soviet system, planned economic, modern Russian system, it's not flexible system. That's why this system will crashed or died. Andrew, what about all Ukrainian growing of all Ukrainian culture of mutual respect and trust? I think it's a really great problem for Ukraine. We don't respect and we don't trust in Ukraine and the power of Ukraine. Thank you.
Oh, I have to go to this lady. Yeah.
Good evening, Zainab. Welcome to Ukraine. Rosa Al-Namri, Kiev National University of TV Art. I am representative of young generation of Ukraine. My question to Mr. Andrei: can our Ukrainian capitalism guarantee to us, to workers of mass media, to have a clear and free career on television, radio, newspapers, and so on?
Was that a question or a job application? Okay.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to carry on with a few more questions. Okay, let's go for the gentleman at the back. Do you have a microphone?
I'm from England, but I've been working here for a number of years. I have a very short question. You mentioned that Georgia has rocketed in the ratings of the World Bank for ease of doing business compared to Ukraine. I have a question. What are the Georgians doing? Why is the Georgian model working better than the Ukrainian model? And I'm going to ask a specific question. Do you think it's possibly because President Saakashvili, as an example of his approach, fired the entire traffic police force of Georgia, 16,000 people, for taking bribes? And can we learn something from this in Ukraine?
There's another question.
What are the steps Ukraine should follow now? And maybe if the planned economy failed and now the capital economy also is going to fail, so what should we do? Maybe we should follow the theory of Smith and let the invisible hands of the market to solve all our problems.
All right. Irina, there were a couple of... about flexibility also, and this theme of how you have to have political leadership in order to develop the institutions and the lack of corruption and so on.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with flexibility of capitalism in the main points. Private property, free market and competition, political and economic competition, it is guarantee of flexibility, but it depends on elites, on level of corruption, on the responsibility of the government, and so on. And you understand it very good. That's why the main point is that corruption is a great and main problem of post-Soviet capitalism in transition countries.
And that's why it's not worked.
Yeah,
and that's why. So you don't mind capitalism, it's just that it's not worked properly.
It is,
so you don't mind it?
Yeah,
you don't.
All capitalism in Russia, in Ukraine, that is not capitalism.
But you don't mind it if it works
imitation. Only imitation. That's why don't speak about the negative nature of capitalism. You don't know what is the real capitalism.
And then you like the real capitalism.
But I like it so much.
Okay.
Buy books.
Okay. Andre and Katerina, I mean, what is clear from some
that
of the...
brings us much closer together.
That's true. Some of the questions we've had from the floor, though, talking about flexible systems, and I want to
and
put
also about democracy.
And democracy.
Well, 1 year ago, Joe Biden of America came here, and he said very simple thing. Democracy does not necessarily mean good governance, and this is the answer. And if we look around the region, we can see very different examples. Speaking of Georgia, I think they were so successful because they were extremely tough on corruption, and because they invested so much into this reshuffle in public service. They
and
invested
you've not
so
been
much.
tough enough on corruption in Ukraine?
Unfortunately, not yet. Not yet.
Okay.
So
you're working on it in the parliament.
And finally, since I do not own one of those luxury cars that David talked about, if we look at the Economist country report, we see that when it comes to consumption, TV sets, mobile phone subscribers, telephone mainlines, cars, and we compare the numbers to the Eastern European countries, we see the numbers are the same or we are slightly lower.
Okay.
We are very close. And that's the result of, that choice which was done 20 years ago.
And a final point to you that's come out as well, Katerina Yushchenko, is that you need the flexibility in the system. You've argued very passionately for free market capitalism, but I think somebody put the point, or maybe you did, that actually even in the West they don't have free market capitalism. They have their systems of subsidies and tariffs. So you're arguing for a pure form of free market capitalism, or are you accepting there could be a kind of Ukrainian model that has some flexibility?
I'm arguing for us to choose a path that will maximize our growth rates, our wealth, minimize our inflation, and then it's up to every citizen to make the choices how much he wants to redistribute the wealth. It's up to every citizen to take a role in trying to build the market economy and the democracy that they want. My argument is let's not try to constantly reinvent flexibility and so on. Let's learn from good examples.
Okay. Thank you. So we've had questions from the floor, we've had responses from our panel now. I'm going to ask our audience here in Kiev to vote again. And while you're doing that, I'm going to be asking our panelists to make their closing arguments, and they're going to be incorporating some of the points raised from the floor. And I should remind you, of course, that if you want to download a free briefing on the issues being debated here, go to www.intelligencesquared.com or www.debati.org, so you can get a free download on all these issues. Audience, please keep the volume down. Ushers as well, please encourage the audience to keep quiet. Andrei Shevchenko, your closing arguments.
We can talk a lot about numbers and about some other boring things, but something which inspires me much more is to talk about the people. And I think the key result of this wonderful transformation that we are part of is the change that we can see inside of the people, in their hearts and in their mind. And I think that this is the major change. We can see people who rely on themselves, who demand much more of the government, and who are ready to stand for their individual rights and freedoms. This is exactly the country that I would like to live in. It was the right choice, and I expect more benefits, more good fruits to come in the future.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, arguing for the motion, your closing arguments, Irina Hakamada.
I'm very positive about our discussion because I'm sure absolutely you are very optimistic about Ukraine's future, post-Soviet countries, free market, democracy, and so on. I only to say only one thing. It is not a very positive thing to want something in absolutely perfect form. If you will dream about perfect capitalism, perfect democracy, we can't do something just now, just here. This was step by step, because to be disappointed is not a very positive feeling.
Okay, Irina Sakamari, thank you. Katerina Yushchenko, your final pitch to the audience.
I want to stress again that we need to learn from the countries that have passed the barrier, that are now non-corrupt, liberal, wealthy countries with growth rates that we would like to see. And as soon as Ukraine, as soon as the other countries in the former Soviet Union that have not done as well start demanding the changes in the rule of law, in the political system that they want, that's when we will see the kind of changes that we want. And I believe that's when we will have the kind of free market capitalism that will bring us wealth.
And final word from you, David Aronovich.
If you're going to be successful democratically, economically, and in every way as a society, you'll have to begin to value freedom and truth above security and, yes, sometimes even that prospect of the tiny bit of extra wealth. You need to build up in your colleges, your universities, your schools, your press institutions, your civic institutions, an attitude of mind where the greatest duty you have to anything and anybody is to the truth.
Right, thank you. All right, so we've heard the closing arguments from our four panellists. Our audience have voted again. Let me remind you how they voted when they came in before the debate started. For the motion, free market capitalism has failed the former Soviet states, 40%. Against the motion, 42%. Don't know, 18%. That's how the audience voted before the debate. After they heard our speakers make their arguments and put their own questions, for the motion, 41%, an increase of 1%. Against the motion, 50%, and the undecided, still sitting on the fence, 9%. So, congratulations to the winners, commiserations to the losers. Our thanks to all the speakers and, of course, to the Foundation for Effective Governance here in Kiev that has made this important debate possible. I thank our audience here at the Ivan Franko National Theatre, to you also at home for watching wherever you are. From me, Zainab Badawi, and the rest of the team, goodbye from Kiev, the capital of Ukraine.